casual thing to throw up for conversation while we're hanging out and we're talking about wooing. Do any of you other wolves in the chat, are you particularly inclined to enjoy singing, especially along with your friends? Because I find that that's a very, like, quote unquote human, I'm using that term very loosely here, obviously. But I find that that's like a very, a way that I can present my wolf or canine side, yeah, in general, and in a way that other people don't look at me crazy for, you know what I mean? It's nice. Okay, so let's see. Video screen, panel. How do I, it says video chat isn't available. You can't stream into this channel. It's not letting me screen share. Isn't that how I should be doing that?
Yes, we might have to ask con staff.
Con staff, let's see. Is there a place to do that?
Oh,
let's see.
Miles is working on it.
Working on it. Oh, perfect. Thank you. We'll just chill with each other until then, and I'll read along. Screen share is only for app.
I think, yeah, if you're using the web browser, you might not be able to watch the screen share.
No, I'm on the app, so that shouldn't be a problem. I was just saying which one of us is quite loud and which of us is rather quiet, because there's a very good chance that I'm just screaming at the microphone, and if it's me, oh, I am quiet. Gosh.
I can turn down my mic.
It's probably, I need to probably turn mine up too. I've probably just got it turned down. Awoo, is that better? Much better. Okay, perfect. Just fun facts. I DM a game with some of the wolves that you're going to hear about today in our chat, and we call it Puppos and Partners, and it's the three of us and our mates, and we do a Dungeons and Dragons game, and my friend, I'm so overwhelmed with this. You trust me, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just like, oh wow, there's so much happening. And yes, this is the Gender's Dog panel, and no, we have not started yet. We're getting started. But yeah, when we to voice check when we first get into our Dungeons and Dragons game, we all go, "Hey woo, hey woo," and howl at each other. So it's like, "Hey woo, hey woo." It's nice. Wow, this is a very full panel. I have to scroll for a while to see like the full list of people. This is exciting.
Yeah, I'm really glad so many people are so excited for this.
It's just such a, and as we of course will, I'm fine for the names to be there. It's not bothering me. Just let me know, Cin. Okay, yeah, I see this. I see your last update. Yeah, just let me know when we're ready to roll. But yeah, I think gender, I think honestly it's just such a, and as we'll obviously talk about in the panel, I think it's a really huge overlap. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And we'll talk about obviously what those reasons are. But I think that this is the Venn diagrams of what we might call the trans umbrella, and Otherkin are like a circle, almost a circle at least. Very, very like an Oreo that's not quite overlapping exactly as it should, but it's we're all here in that creamy center. Trans rights for damn sure. Can I swear in this panel? This is an 18 plus panel, or this is not an 18 plus panel. Can I swear? That's probably important for me to know.
I think so far the guideline has been not too much swearing.
Oh, it's PG-13, so I'm allowed one.
One non-sexual F-bomb, yeah.
Okay, so hypothetically, Let me custom slideshow, and I should be able to do. Can you all see that? Excellent. Let me make it a little smaller on my screen so I can still see the chat if I want to. Back and forth between the actual slide and the PowerPoint header for some reason. Has it stopped doing that? I made the window smaller, so it could have been doing that while I was making the window smaller. Yeah, it was probably just while I was minimizing the window. But yes, if you're in the panel and you're wondering, we do have a PowerPoint, and it's not a very long PowerPoint, and if you can't see it for whatever reason, you should probably be okay, because we're going to vocally express all the information that's on here. But if you're on desktop, you won't be able to see it, but that's okay. It's not, like I said, there should be nothing that you need to be able to see. It's just if visually it helps.
And yeah, we could post the individual slides as images.
I had those already in the in our remember the other day in our play channel on the other server. So if you want to copy, or whoever is not speaking can copy and paste over. So
yeah, sure.
All right, we ready to rock and roll, y'all? I'm gonna take that as a yes. If we were like at a con, you would all be howling, but we're gonna just assume that this is correct. So okay, welcome to My Gender is Dog. This PowerPoint presentation and this little. First of all, House of Chimeras, I just want to wave at you really quick because I have not been able to be around very much this weekend because I've been super busy. And I don't think you know this, but I'm Jessie of Zephyr back from TDF. So it's absolutely a delight to see you. And I just have had so many people have been telling me that you've been here, and I've been really excited because I've been like, oh my gosh, House of Chimeras! Like it's exciting to see you. So I'm glad that you're around and still circulating Kin community as well. So we'll catch up after this, but back to the panel. So excited that we're recording this too. My Gender is Dog, welcome to the panel. I'm Cin, and
I'm Pete.
And just to know a little bit about us, do you want me to start, Pete, or do you want to introduce us, or?
You can start, yeah.
So, oh no, only 50 viewers. Okay, so, we should have sourced this art. Pete, will you grab the art source while I'm introducing us?
Yes.
So, obviously I'm Cin, I'm that dog in the middle. I am from Western North Carolina in the Appalachians. We like to playfully call ourselves Three Wolf Moon. I don't know if is Jay in here? Jay's here to hang out with us today, right? Perfect. So there's Jay in the chat. So Jay is that dog on the right. And Jay had input on the entire panel as well, but we are just presenting it together. And so I'm Cin, I'm a werewolf. Most specifically, I am of red wolf subspecies. I've actually identified as non-human for around 20 years, so I like to call myself a gray muzzle. I was around in the original Hearted conversation that House of Chimeras was talking about the other day. Have been running around in forums for a while. However, I only recently realized that I was non-binary. It was within the past year, and it was with the help of these other two very good dogs. And Pete, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Pete. I'm 30. I live in Chicago. I am a shapeshifter, polymorph, something. Typically leaning toward werewolf. And I've been in and out of non-human communities for, I think, about 12 years.
And yes, we all use they them pronouns. I have it on the old draft. We were like, maybe we should put our pronouns on here. That might be useful. And so on the new draft, we all have they them, and we like to joke we're just a bunch of non-binary wolves, which we'll talk about. Jay, who is in the chat here with us, is 29 and from Los Angeles, and has always felt that they were non-human. this summer will be the 10th anniversary of them coming out as non-binary as well. So the other two wolves have a little more experience with being non-binary, but we kind of thought it would be interesting to talk about this experience on from the perspective of both someone who's new to being non-binary and someone who's been, and people who've been non-binary for a while. So Pete, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah. So being both trans and kin, I experience both gender dysphoria and species dysphoria. For myself personally, sorry. Excuse me. For myself personally, species dysphoria tends to be stronger for me. But yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Jay. And I do think a lot of my non-human gender stuff does go back to simplicity. Like, a dog doesn't see gender the same way that like the complex human brain does necessarily. And with finding my own non-binary and non-human gender, I'm able to make it personal. It's my own specific gender. And like, in my opinion, finding and forming my own gender makes me feel powerful, kind of like transforming into a werewolf can make you feel powerful. Yeah, and Cin, what had you wanted to say about early life acceptance?
So my theory about early life acceptance is that if we start out from a really young age identifying ourselves as non-human, and so you say to yourself, something's off here, something's not right. I feel like that's really analogous a lot of times with the trans experience as well. And maybe, and as we'll talk later, saying something's not right isn't exactly the right terminology, but just saying something is maybe a little different from everybody else. And so when you grow up with that kind of willingness to say, well, I'm probably not human, then when it comes to things like, well, I'm probably not X gender I was assigned at birth, it's a little easier for you to make that transition. Like you can say, okay, that makes, you know, if I can step out of the realm of being a human, then I can certainly say I'm not a woman, right? That's super easy for me to,
Yeah,
such an easy step for me to make.
it leads right into more self-examination
Absolutely.
and finding things that feel good and right for yourself.
I feel like one of the appeals too of this is making it personal, which is something I feel like we should do with all kinds of things in life. Because one, it just helps us, and we'll talk more about this as we go along. But it makes when you're non-human, then you have that push to identify what your kin type is and learn more about yourself. And the so by it makes it personal, right? It makes you take self-reflection. It makes you say, what is about me that's non-human? What is it about me that's not the gender that I was assigned at birth? If that makes sense. Anything else on that, Pete? On the slide?
I think I'm good on this side, yeah.
I don't want to overlap in stuff we have on the other slides. So.
Yeah.
And so I'll go ahead and go here. So being kin and finding your gender are both lifelong journeys. Both of these things are experiences that you're going to change, that are going to kind of change as you go throughout your life. For some people, you figure out what your kin type is and you get it right from the gate, and you're like, all right, this is what I am. It's never going to change. But for a lot of people, it's a constant growing experience. I mean, we've all known people. I mean, I'm a wolf, and so obviously I'm not dragging people who identify as wolves, but we've all known people who started out at like 13, 14 in like the experience of kin, and who started out maybe as like a wolf, but later down the road found out that maybe that wasn't exactly it. You know, that wolf was just easy and acceptable. And I think we see that in similar ways with the trans experience as well. You know, you might say, oh, well, I've known a lot of folks who maybe started out, assigned female at birth, but then transitioned to male and went and like swapped to male presentation. And then really what they were was non-binary. And so it was like a constant growing process. And so kind of what we're wanting to highlight here is that this is about a journey. This is about going through different phases of life and being able to change and be flexible. And we think that being trans and kin allows for more of that flexibility. And it allows you to, and kind of the cute thing we like to assure ourselves is that the moon goes through phases, and so do we. And that's okay. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to be different. It's okay to start out thinking you're absolutely this one kin type and later being something else. It's okay to think that it's okay to be cis and explore being trans and then later say, oh, actually, maybe I'm not trans. Maybe I am just cis. It is so okay to just be flexible and explore. And that's really what we want to highlight here. It's just take it one paw at a time.
Yes, very agreed.
Anything else there?
There's a Tumblr post by Girl with the Loon Tattoo that says, people say phase, like impermanence means insignificance. Show me a permanent state of the self. And I always think about that a lot, because we are, as living beings, we're constantly growing and constantly changing. And it's important to keep that in mind and remember that change happens and change is okay and change is natural.
Yeah, nothing in nature stays the same all year. In fact, it is the very nature of nature to change. Nature is just like the seasons of the year, like even like a desert doesn't stay the same all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's a constant evolving process, and we have to be, and especially I feel like as kinfolk, a lot of us kinfolk are a little, we feel more in line with nature or that process. But yes, Ratatouille, perfect. Well, it's beautiful.
Also, I wanted to say, I didn't realize I'm non-binary until I was about, I think, 24, and then Cin, you realized more recently than that, right? And it's never too late to start looking at this or think about it. For some people, it's obvious from childhood, but like even if you're in your 30s or whatever, or 60s or 80s, it's always perfectly healthy to start examining your gender.
Yeah, I mean, if I had never accepted change, then I would still be like, oh, let's just say I'd be a very different person than I am now. But I picked up they them pronouns in just the last year, and I'm 28, so that's very new to me, very very new to me. And but it took a long. It was something I was. Anyway, I don't want to. I think this is on another part of the slide, and I don't want to get ahead of myself. But yeah, it's a lifelong process.
Mm-hmm.
Ready on this slide?
Yeah.
Do you want to do this one, or do you want me to?
I can, yeah. I do think that we mentioned dysphoria earlier, but I do also think that euphoria is something that's really, really important, and finding things that give you gender and species euphoria. I'm DMAB, and if I lived my life as a man, I'd be okay. I could cope with that. That would be fine. But finding ways to explore my non-binary gender, and also my wolfiness, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel great. So doing things that can give you gender euphoria and species euphoria, like that helped me could function that way, and yeah, it allows for exploration, and you can try different things and try different things that feel good and that make you feel better, rather than things that'll hurt you or even just be neutral to you.
There's a small discussion in the chat going about like how animals, like animal gender, and how it's very fluid in the animal kingdom, which is absolutely true. There's all kinds of, I mean, there are literally animals out there that can just change their, even what we would call, and again, I'm using air quotes for this very heavily, biological gender at will. People who can just be like, oh, or people, animals that can just be like, nah, I'm going to be a man today, or and again, we're using these terminologies very, very loosely, but yeah, I mean, even in nature, we see that fluidity. Biological sex is a good term, yes. But even biological sex is kind of like, in nature, our understanding of biological sex is very different in nature. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. So that's kind of why I keep flopping around that term too. But but yeah, just to kind of bounce off what Pete was saying, I think I would almost argue that euphoria is more important than dysphoria. I spent a lot of my life, I spent a long time thinking, man, it would be really cool to be non-binary. Being non-binary seems so perfect, and I love that concept. But for years and years, I told myself, but I don't hate being perceived as a woman. I'm fine with it. It's okay. In fact, sometimes I like it even. It's not a bad thing. And so I was always like, well, I guess I'm not really non-binary then. And so it was that concept of euphoria that helped me come to that understanding and comfort with myself. I was explaining it to my spouse the other day, and it's almost like if dysphoria is that churning feeling in your stomach that makes you feel wrong or terrible, euphoria is a burst of fireworks in your head. It's nothing gives me euphoria like someone seeing me in public and saying, sir, ma'am, sir, and like, stubborn. Nothing gives me that fireworks euphoria other than someone like not being able to gender me correctly, or the first time I had a friend correct themselves in person and say they, and say that, like, they started to say she, and then they said, oh, they, and then they just kept going. Fireworks, right? Fireworks. And just like that feeling of, oh my gosh, this feels right to me. And I think that's so important. Gender euphoria, and the same with species euphoria. And so, like, to tie those things in together, there's the thing like being called a good dog, or being told that I'm a good dog, or someone saying that dog over there is my friend, or Cinna, you're such a good wolf, or like or someone identifying me as a werewolf other than myself doing it. It gives me that same fireworks sensation. It gives me that sense of euphoria. And I think if we focus on euphoria instead of dysphoria, it allows for so much more personal exploration. It validates that personal exploration. It's like, it's positive reinforcement, and it most importantly encourages a healthy relationship with yourself. Dysphoria says, okay, I'm going to base my identity off of how bad I feel. Euphoria says, I'm going to base my identity off of what makes me feel good. And I think that it's just a healthier way of approaching this. Sorry, go ahead, Pete.
No, I was just agreeing with you. But yeah, I agree. Being called a good dog feels so right and good. My wife is over here laughing at me right now.
And yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think dysphoria is basing your identity off of how bad you feel. That's a good point. I apologize. That was a bad way to phrase that. And because I certainly don't want to discredit people's dysphoria either. So maybe a better way to say it is making sure, like, I think dysphoria can help you identify things for yourself. Because I think any kind of feeling like that it's like if you have pain in your body, right? That's a sign that something is not as it should be. And so dysphoria in that sense can be used, but in the same sense, if your knee is hurt, you shouldn't keep wiggling your knee back and forth to feel the pain. You already know where the pain is. You should be seeking what makes your knee feel better, right? Does that make sense? Is that a better analogy, maybe?
Dysphoria can be really, really good for helping you identify things that you need to change.
Dysphoria is knowing what you're not. I like that way of describing it.
Yeah.
And if you don't experience dysphoria or euphoria, I'm not agender, so I can't speak to that, but maybe agender is something to look into. I think from people I've spoken to, a lot of people who experience being agender experience an absence of that euphoria and dysphoria. But again, that's not an experience I can personally speak to, so someone else would have to speak to that one.
I'm not agender either, but yeah, that does sound like a agender experience to me.
Yeah, on the non-binary spectrum, I'm more like gender fuck as opposed to agender or gender fluid or whatever term we want to use. Gender fuck is a personal favorite, but okay, I'm just monitoring the chat really quick.
Oh yeah, then you use the one PG-13 F word.
Yep, that was my PG-13 F word. Get your own panel for the fuck word. Today's gender, the color yellow.
It's a good gender.
Off the air, panel canceled. Gender slip and slide, I like that as well. All right, Peter, we get on this panel and we'll go ahead and move to the next, or not panel, screen.
Yes.
All right, so we want to take a second and touch on neopronouns and xenogender, which is a really kin concept. Do you want to talk about this, Peter, or do you want me to roll through this?
You go through it.
So this just highlights the concept that gender is really personal and intimate to each person. And that, so xenogender and neopronouns, although there's, yeah, chat is happening really fast. It's hard to keep up. I'm glad you guys are so excited though. This is very nice. So xenogender exists outside of the gender binary. And so it creates, it's a more custom personal experience from person to person. There are some pronouns that are what we might call like more common, and that you see more often. So things like zers is becoming a little more common. And I think using a flexible amount of, and I think flexible pronouns are totally okay. That's something that I was going to say. So a couple of examples that we've listed here is pup self. That's one that the three of us wolves have all talked about amongst ourselves really liking personally. And auxiliary pronouns is a really good term for them as well. And V ver self and AM air self. And I see a couple people in the chat saying something about like, and again, the chat's moving a little quick, but I think what I'm kind of reading is this idea of that neopronouns are difficult because they're hard to remember. And I totally agree with that. But one thing I would like to kind of make clear, as with many things with the trans experience, like I find euphoria when people correct themselves often. That like if someone were to slip up and address me as she, but then a second later I say, oh, I'm sorry, they, I'm not going to be upset that you corrected. I'm going to be like, oh, they thought to correct. That's so kind. Now, obviously, don't make a big show of it and like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Oh, I really fucked that up. Don't turn it into a whole debacle. But yes, ultimately pronouns are for the trans person's comfort, not other people's. And so, it's making sure that we are trying to be conscious. And that's why things with like neopronouns, really good example of why, and I'm a bad example of this because I don't think I have it in mind right now, but why it's really important to list your pronouns, for everybody to list your pronouns, whether you're cis or whether you're trans. Like having that commonality of listing your pronouns somewhere easy to find, right on, like usually right under your name, right next to your name. The more we normalize that, the easier it is. Because if I can't remember your pronouns and I can just glance right above at your pronouns and see them right there and next to your name, it's a lot easier for me to remember them, right? Like I can be like, oh yeah, of course they use pups pronouns. And yeah, it takes some time and it takes work, but we're gonna give a couple examples of ways that you can practice. And pronoun rules are also a great thing. Yes. Love some.
Yeah, I've been really grateful that the Othercon server has pronoun roles. It's been fantastic.
Okay, and so xenogender, we also put the definition for xenogender up here because we really liked it. That cannot be contained by human understanding of gender, more concerned with crafting other methods of gender categorization and hierarchy, such as those relating to animals, plants, or others, creatures, and things. So this kind of feels like the Ken gender almost. One of the things that obviously, like, our panel is called My Gender is Dog, and I think it's a really common thing for people in the Ken experience to identify their gender as what they're kin with. I think that's the fact that we had so many people who just saw our panel name and were like, oh my god, yes, my gender is dragon, or my gender is computer, or whatever it might be. It immediately resonated, and that's because, like, xenogender is that concept of catering, of fine-tuning your gender experience to be most closely in line with what your species experience is, so to say.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Pete, you want to take this one?
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of good, like, great things that you can do or find to affirm your non-human gender. A lot of therapists will encourage otherkin and therian identities. Unfortunately, we do often have to fully explain the concept to them, but once it's explained, most therapists that I've heard about or interacted with will encourage it. And thank you, Espeon. And then it's also, especially like here at Othercon or in other non-human servers or on Twitter or whatever, it's good to find friends who can support you, and you can find people you trust and say, hey, I want to try these other pronouns. Could we do this? Like, could you use these pronouns for me? Like, maybe even in private, you can just try it, ease your way into the water. Rook, about therapists. When I talked to my therapist about it, I first started by just talking about how I am a very big fan of werewolves, and like they mean a lot to me. And then after a couple sessions, I explained, like, I do identify as a werewolf and I identify as non-human. And he was like, oh, that's great, and that's a really cool way to express yourself and to process your thoughts and emotions.
Agreed. For me, I have compound PTSD, which we're dipping a little into mental health for a second. But for me, I have often spoken with my therapist in the sense of, identifying as a wolf often can help me mentally process and spiritually process. And my therapist has always, thank you, PTSD is a rough, because of that, my therapist has always said that is a great way for me to, quote unquote, process my emotions. And there's certainly something that I can relate to in being a werewolf with also being a person who has CPTSD. And some of the mood swings, for example, or having a rise up of anger that feels very werewolf in nature and things. But yes, I can agree. I've had actually 2 different therapists who have been supportive of my kin experience and have said, that's great. If wearing things with wolves on them, if identifying yourself as a wolf, if calling yourself a werewolf helps your mental experience, then you should do that. Now, that said, obviously there are going to be shit therapists out there. But if we just like to put this on here to say, like, good therapists are encouraging this kind of thing. Therapists who are interested in catering to, like Kit said, what your goals in therapy are. If your goal is to come in and say, I am working on confidence, and me thinking, if I come in and say to my therapist, I want to work on my personal self-confidence, also identify as a werewolf, and dressing and referring to myself as a werewolf helps me feel more confident, then a good therapist is going to say, then think of yourself as a werewolf, because obviously that makes you feel more confident, right? So yeah, just sorry to pop in there, Pete.
No, that was great. I love it. And then yeah, finding ways that your gender and your kin experience overlap and exploring those and celebrating those is a great practice. I like to draw myself as my kin type in different gender presentations or with a different body, or just to explore different ways that they connect and interact and make me feel good. I refer to my body hair as my fur. I I like to wear a collar. Right now, I'm wearing a shirt with a howling wolf on it, and I'm wearing my tail. Um, uh, but yeah, expressing yourself through art and through your clothes and through the things that you call yourself and you ask your your trusted friends and family to refer to you as uh, are great ways to affirm these feelings and to help you feel great.
In my experience, so one thing I wanted to mention too, when I say subtle integration on here too, so I am a professional. So I'm actually in the process of starting a nonprofit for a community center for my town. I've worked in domestic violence for the past several years before this. I am what people would consider to be, quote unquote, a professional. But I still have found ways to dress to my personal identity. So things like shirts that are patterned with paw prints. One outfit that I have that I particularly love in the autumn is it's like brown pants and like a cream colored shirt and like a red overshirt that are like the colors of my fur. And then like taking a scarf and wrapping it around. I have a certain like furry scarf that I can wrap around my neck that kind of feels almost like a wolf ruff. And it gives me that kind of like, the what's the term I'm looking for? The phantom feeling of having that ruff around my neck. And so don't be afraid to get creative with it, and explore, things that give you that confidence, because certainly having that feeling of having a big wolf ruff around my neck helped me hold my head a little taller that day and helps me feel more confident when I go in to present things, because I've got that feeling of being a big werewolf, right? And so it's like, yeah, it gives me that good positive. And I also I usually keep my nails long because I like the clicky clacky of the nails when cause it makes me think of, dog nails. Yeah, all kinds of different stuff like that. Right now I'm in a fuzzy red sweater. I almost put my tail on, but then I didn't have a good loop to wear it on today. So, but I'm also in, colors of my kin and like those kind of things. It creates a positive association with yourself, and it promotes that positive identity with yourself, which is really what all of this is about.
Yes, exactly. Also, similar to your scarf that you mentioned, I specifically learned how to tie a larger knot in a necktie so that I would get the same fur ruff feeling from wearing a necktie.
Yeah, it's just you got to learn to like hack yourself in, like hack the feelings into your life, hack the things that promote that sensation. Wearing your hair up on both sides of your head. I've seen people with the little space buns lately are really popular, and every time I see that, I'm like, I bet that would feel like really good phantom ears. Give that phantom ear impression. Just different things like that. Trans being a medical thing. That's not so much in this panel, I don't think. Not necessarily because there's not medical pieces that play into it, but just more because like that's not what this panel is about. Okay, so we ready to roll past Pawsitive Affurmations?
Yes.
And this is our last slide, which is just to say, try it out. Nothing is gonna help you get that experience better than just giving it a try. And so there's a couple different things that you can do that we've got listed on here. So there's like asking trusted friends to experiment with your pronouns. Emphasis on Kin is punk. I feel like Kin is inherently punk in my team, but I think being Kin is inherent, and I think being trans and Kin both are inherently punk. But asking trusted friends to experiment with pronouns. So like for me, kind of like I talked about earlier, if I had never met Jay and Pete, I don't think I ever would have come to terms with being non-binary. Seeing their euphoria, experiencing like the way that, like learning more about the way they experience gender, and then they were the first people that I asked to try they them for me, and to like identify with non-binary, and so if I had never made friends with them and I had never gotten to know them, like I never would have had that experience. And so reaching out to your friends and saying, can you try this for me for a week? Are you, can you just for today use this pronoun, or can just in this particular Discord server, can you use this pronoun for me while I try this out? And not every person is going to feel comfortable with that. But yes, the pronoun dressing room, actually the pronoun website we have on here is an example of that. So that's something, if you, we'll put that link in the chats after, but it's a
yeah,
website.
I just pasted the link right now.
Oh, perfect, thank you. You can basically go in and put your name, which pronouns you want to use, and it'll just generate a bunch of different like sentences with your name and the pronouns, and kind of give you a feel for how it makes you gut feel when you read that. Like if you read that sentence and it makes you feel good or bad, or you're like,
And the way the pronoun dressing room is formatted, you can input your name and preferred pronouns, or the pronouns you want to try out, and plug them into like Alice in Wonderland, or a Sherlock Holmes story, or just like random sentences. So you can see them in all kinds of different settings and being used different ways. It's really, really cool. I've been recommending the pronoun dressing room at failedslacker.com for a long time.
And then the other thing we recommend is joining different kin groups to try out that experience. Now, not every kin group is going to be receptive to that, but for example, just to plug our server while we're here, if one of our server members want to toss the link in the chat, you're welcome to do that. We have a werewolf and werecreature focus.
Oh.
They got excited about World Wide Wereweb. But servers like this, ours is more werecreature focused, and we like to say werecreatures and their appreciators. Joining that kind of thing, we've had a lot of people join who are like, I kind of feel like maybe I'm a werewolf, but I'm not sure, and I would love to hang out with you guys and listen to your experiences and how that feels for you, to learn a little bit more about whether I feel like I am a werewolf. And so like joining different groups that are focused around that, or that allow experimentation, it kind of goes back to that beginning of just remember, like, change is okay, and it's okay to explore, and it's okay to admit that you're not sure. I think that's a really thing, is like, admitting that you don't know yourself up front and saying, I'm not sure, but I would love guidance. Like, I think people are very receptive to that as a whole. I think a lot of us in this experience, I love that. I think many of us who are in this experience understand what it feels like to not be sure of yourself. And we understand what it feels like to question yourself. And so if you come forward and you say, I'm not sure, can you help me? I think you're going to find that people are going to be ready and willing to step up and do that.
Yeah.
That's what we have. Pete, do you have any other notes? And if that, after that, we can maybe just take questions from the chat, or for the rest of the session.
Let me just look over my notes real quick. Yeah, I just, like, it comes down to I'm non-human, so I don't have to have a human gender.
Yes, yes.
And I I can make my gender what I want it to be, and I can express it the way I want it. And that's a positive and healthy and important thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, just being non-human, identifying as non-human. And certainly one thing we would want to emphasize is this is just speaking from our experience of transgender, and like what we have like we can only speak to our experiences, right? And so that's the
Mhm.
big caveat with all of this is just 100% just what we can say, and we totally acknowledge that people are going to experience things. Like one thing we say on Worldwide Wereweb, which is kind of applicable here, is one of our rules is we don't tell people how to be kin. And I think in the same way, we're not ever going to tell people how to be trans. And so the
Mhm.
trans and the kin experience are super fluid to everybody. And just because we experience it one way doesn't mean that everybody is going to experience it the same way.
Yeah. And Jasper and other people who experience transness differently, I would love to hear your thoughts. I would like if my DMs are typically open here on Discord, so shoot me a question, yeah, or just let me know. I would love to hear your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing we want to do is um, come in here and be like, you have to experience it the way we've said you experience it. Like that's the exact opposite of what the point of this was, really.
Mhm.
um, so question. Any questions people have for us? I think I saw someone
Parker.
ask if we spoken about.
Oh,
Yes, I see it
werewolfery
now.
in trans spaces from House of Chimeras.
Yes. Pete, you might be because I'm like I said, I'm very new to identifying as. In fact, I'm still like I keep doing that thing to myself where I keep being like, I can't call myself trans because I don't experience transphobia on the regular. But I think that that's not fair to myself. But that being said, I think Pete could probably speak better to that.
Um, I I I have talked a little bit about my werewolfiness in spaces that were more focused on the trans stuff than on kin stuff. And I've found that for trans men and trans women and non-binary people, just all across the board, werewolf narratives are really relatable as trans narratives. Uh, it's about the body changing and not knowing how to handle the things that the world throws at you, and like body hair is involved. So I typically, when I bring up werewolf stuff as trans narratives, it typically is very, very positive responses.
Parker, yes, I see you wanted to ask a question. Let me see if I can find it if you don't want to copy and paste it back into the channel. Oh, I see. I think Jay answered it. And Jay is a good person to answer that. That's probably who I would point to out of the three of us to answer that question. So I think we just answered House of Chimera's question. Did House of Chimeras have another question? Because it was asking about have we spoken about our werewolf experience in trans spaces, and I think that's what Pete just spoke to.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I really appreciate the people who are in the chat who are like, this has nothing to do with my experience, but I'm here just to learn and it's been interesting. I really appreciate y'all. That's like, I mean, that's number one allyship, I think. Number one step of allyship is education. So Blood and Chocolate, oh my god, y'all. Blood and Chocolate was definitely transformative for me. Just to throw that out there. Like, that's just not related. I just want
Still haven't seen the Blood and Chocolate movie, and I've heard that it's not the best film, but I've read the book a million times, and it makes me so happy. I love that book.
Yeah, Blood and Chocolate. I mean, I think the book is really, if you haven't read the movie, you're not really missing a lot, in my opinion. It's about the shape-shifting. Absolutely.
I love that meme. Thank you. Beethoven says for anyone else is calling themselves good boy or girl less of a gender affirmation thing and more of a species affirmation thing. Very definitely. I personally like. I'm not a boy or a girl, but it being called either or being called just a good dog feels so good. It immediate self-esteem boost. Uh, so yeah,
And
even though I'm not a boy or a girl, being called either feels great.
yeah, and for me, like, I'm like gender fluid, so hearing good boy or good girl or any of the or good dog, like all of the above work for me, because it's just like the tail starts wagging in the brain space. You know what I mean? Like, it's at that point, I don't care what gender you're calling me. I'm like, yeah, tail wags. Let me see. Started going by Fox. How did we feel picking various names? For me, I um, I used to go by, so my full name, quote unquote, online is Cinnamon. And I used to go by Cinna. Oh, it's got me blocked for posting things. So I used to go by Cinna, and since I have like moved more towards non-binary identification, I've started going by Cin instead. And for me, it was just because the A sound made a slightly more, it makes it sound a little more feminine to me. And then I also like having short food-related names or like inanimate object-related names. I've noticed that's a big non-binary experience too. Is that a lot of there's a big running joke that all non-binary people look around in nature, pick something at random, and call themselves that. Which is obviously not true, but it's a funny joke. And I think having that short. So for me, Cin was really nice. What about you?
I typically just go by Pete, which actually is my middle name. So I didn't have like. I started going by Pete before I really looked at my gender at all, and I just at one point was like, I think it might feel good to try a new name to be called something other than what other people decided to call me. So I started going by Pete instead of my first name, and it feels very good. And then online, my typical username is Dogwithglasses, which often just gets shortened to Dog, which is fairly genderless and feels very good.
Yeah, one funny thing, and we mentioned our D&D campaign earlier, which is somewhat similar in the sense that we are playing in our D&D campaign very indulgently,
Mm-hmm.
basically versions of ourselves. And so our characters are names with similar things, and needless to say, we have werewolves named Cypress, Doggard, and Wolfie are the werewolf story. So I've also gone by Wolfie. I've been nicknamed Wolfie. Jay often goes by Wolfie in circles. I think with names to maybe it's a non-binary experience to be willing to respond to a lot more names as well. Ripley from Alien. That's awesome. Yeah, haven't we all been by Wolfie? All the wolves in the chat, we've probably all gone by Wolfie at some point. I got nicknamed Wolfie. I had never gone by it before last Halloween when I did a werewolf drag at a show, and so I like dressed in drag as a werewolf, and so I had like a big beard and whatever. And the drag queens nicknamed me Wolfie, so I'm like, well, I have to go by this now. I can't not. Like, if the drag queens say that's my name, I have to do it. Yeah, basically. I mean, it's fursuiting essentially, yeah. Um, as far as people in here who are transmedical, like we said earlier, there's different, like, I don't think we're gonna, I think as long as we're all being polite with each other here, there's no problems. Like, as long as we're willing to be respectful of how we all have different experiences, you know. Okay, I think we just have a couple more minutes left. Anything else before we wrap up today? Any more questions? Yeah, we have 10 more minutes. So I mean, I'm happy to just sit here and talk at you all for 10 more minutes, but if you have questions, I'd rather do that. And I'm glad people have enjoyed it. We were like, oh gosh, what were we gonna present? Because we knew we wanted to present on something because we're both kind of gray muzzles, and we were like, well, we've been in the Otherkin community for a long time, and certainly we have things we can speak about. And we were just like, I am petting you all in my heart. Any tips for looking at gender, like non-human gender, like how to start, basically? How does one start exploring it? I think talking with other people who are having that kind of experience is a really good way to kind of flesh things out. Because I think even, for example, even with myself and P and J, even though we're all three non-binary wolves, we have different ways that we experience that. And we have different things that make us feel more wolf-like or more non-binary. We have different ways of experiencing non-binary. So having conversations with other people. I think makeup is a cool idea. As far as exploration, yeah, just talking with other, especially I saw, I don't know if Fox, I don't know if you are a fox, but I would encourage specifically talking with people who are foxes, maybe even. And, you know, how do you experience gender? What does that feel like to you? Makeup to make your face look more different, more non-human. I would look at theater makeup and stuff. And that's probably a good place to start, just looking at like tutorials on, I always recommend tutorials on YouTube. There's a lot of really good, Tumblr has in particular a lot of really good accounts for ideas about like fashion experimentation. I used to run a Tumblr ages ago, but I'm not on Tumblr much anymore, but there's a lot of good stuff for that. I see Kasoda said, how do you think about physical relation to your body, sex, and how it relates to kin type? For me being Canaan, there's a lot more androgyny. So one thing we had considered was having a panel, because one thing we could talk about, and I'm obviously not going to go into it, is there's a lot of discussion that could be had about like physical, like genitalia, for example, just to kind of nod that way. That can come into conversation when you are trans. And so since this is an 18 and under or like 18 and under friendly, we're not going to go into that too much, but I think there's definitely, I think androgyny feels more natural to me as a wolf, if that kind of makes sense in relation to what you're talking about as far as like my body's biological sex and how it relates to my kin type. I like to present in a much more androgynous way because that feels more wolfish to me. It's kind of hard to go into too much detail without being specific, but certainly I prefer to, for example, bind my chest because that gives me a more curved chest feeling like a wolf would have, as opposed to, you know, human breasts, without going into much more detail than that. Pete, do you have any thoughts about that? Physical relation to your body, sex, and kin type?
I'm not sure. I'm blanking on words now.
You're valid. We'll go to the next question. IDing as one gender as human and then IDing as another based off your kin identity. Thoughts, experiences. Yeah, I certainly think that that's, you know, I think there's something to be said about having different, there are still circles I go by she, her in, and I'm okay with that. And probably for a long time I still will. And maybe I'll never ask those people to identify me with they, them. I definitely started using they, them online like only. And so it started out as just like, okay, they, them only online. This is just my experimentation. So, Yeah, Pete, any thoughts about that? IDing as one gender as human and then IDing as another based off your kin identity. I think that's also saying, like, I've met people who like maybe were male themselves but felt like they were a female wolf. I can't really speak to that experience myself, but someone else maybe.
I mean, one, it's definitely possible to have more than one gender or to be gender fluid. So I don't think that is out of the question or odd or anything, to have different genders like that. And yeah, I've interacted with people who, one of the people on it's not still going anymore, but the Inner Wild Therian podcast, uh, she's a woman, but then her kin type or her stereotype is a male wolf. So she experiences different genders based on, like her human body versus her kin type. So yeah, that's definitely a valid thing, in my opinion.
Fox asked, how would I go about explaining this kind of thing to my partner? He's accepting of trans, but words are hard. So my spouse is not kin, and but we've been together nearly 10 years. But explaining this to him was very nerve-wracking at first. And what I find is easiest to segue people into it is starting out by saying, I strongly identify with. And then like as you have more of that, because what you'll find often is that people can resonate with that really easily. Most people have something like that they strongly identify with. And so once you have that kind of established and you had conversations about that a couple times and explored how that feels, you can probably have a better sense of how to approach the identify as with your partner, because you've already kind of got a sense of how they feel about I identify with. But I very distinctly remember the time I talked to my spouse for the first time about identifying as a wolf. I was sitting on the end of the bed and like felt just sick to my stomach because I was like, he's gonna think I am a weirdo and he was gonna throw me out of this apartment. But thankfully it went very well, and now I get head pets every night. So 10 out of 10 do recommend.
Yeah, I think like you can bring up to your partner if they understand, if they are cool with trans issues and topics, you can say, hey, I don't think I fit into the binary man or woman, and then start explaining specifically what that means for you, and go into the things that you like and dislike about being gendered certain ways. And then, I don't know, like, even if your partner isn't as understanding of like kin stuff, if you say, this is how I like to express my gender, this is how my gender feels, if they're, that connected, then that gets the same message across, and it might be easier to, ease them in. If that makes sense.
I'm also a practicing witch, and I find that if I just scrolling through the chat, someone mentioned about spiritually minded. The concept of Syrian and Otherkin is extremely common in spiritual communities, even if they don't call it that. The amount of spiritual folks I have met who have been like, I identify as a dragon, but have never heard of Otherkin in their lives, is very common. And so I think, being able, kind of maybe approaching it with that mindset, that's why I say like having those initial conversations of identifying with can really help as how to get to a point of identifying as. Because if they're very spiritual and they're like, oh yeah, me too, then that makes it way easier. Not that everybody's experiences are spiritual, but some people's are.
Yeah.
For the binary, I just saw that. Sorry, I'm like scrolling through the chat.
Okay, we should probably wrap up, because closing ceremonies are about to start in, I believe, the chat for panel 2. Thank you everyone for coming. It's been so great to talk about this with a bunch of people, and to get different viewpoints. And I really appreciate all you guys. I'm glad you guys have enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna plug our channel for you werewolves one more time before I pop off here. Everybody go enjoy the closing ceremonies, and thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, also real quick, Miles, thank you for posting the Inner Wild link. That's a good podcast. I like it a lot.